Retailers, commercial buildings, and many other industries have had demands as a result of the pandemic. Today, we'll be discussing technology solutions which can help with these new demands. Hello, I'm Joan Goodchild, content producer with ISC News, and welcome to our first ISC News webinar, where our panel of experts will talk about video surveillance for temporary structures and new operational challenges. I'd like to hand it over now to Bob Moore, Director of Marketing with Access Communications, to introduce our panelists and lead the conversation today. Bob?
Thank you so much, Joan, and welcome everybody to our webinar. Hello, fellow security professionals. Wow, since March, what such unprecedented times we have all faced. From a stock market that crashed to a bull market that's been astounding as its recovery, from the government shutting down our economies to figuring out how to restart economies, a huge unemployment base, and secondarily civil unrest. There's obviously continued uncertainty. So how do you guys plan for the future? And things like mask or no mask. I mean, I remember when you could smoke in airplanes back when I was a kid, and then, you know, that whole controversy took 20, 30 years to work through, but mask or no mask has been a hot topic immediately. So everything's happening so rapidly. So I don't know how you guys fare with this. So today our panel is going to discuss technology, holistic approaches, and how to approach things today with solutions and for tomorrow. I'm Bob Moore. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. We have an all-star cast here. Combined, we have nearly 100 years of experience, which just means we're all getting older. Sorry. We'll start with our panel. They're all from the South, so we'll start with Hedgie. Hedgie is from the Carolinas somewhere. We won't identify where he is, but he's considered Mr. Retail within our organization, and all of our panelists work with end customers today and all have a background working with manufacturers and integrators, so are really in tune. Also from the South, we have from Southern Canada, Southern Ontario specifically, Rick Snook. He's our business development manager for retail and banking for Canada. He's held a ton of different positions there, including running his own integration position for our company. And then we have John Merlino. He's the business development manager for government. He's a decorated Navy commander and a longtime security veteran. So we'll start with John on our panel. So John, healthcare was hit hard and it was hit fast, especially in places like New York and other hotspots. You worked with companies to help bring out solutions to meet an unexpected rise in patient care. I'm sure our audience would love to hear more about the deployment of technology that helped them out. So take it away and start us off, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome and thanks to all of those attending the webinar. Hope you're all staying well and fit. Yeah, the opportunity that Bob is referencing came about through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or as they like to refer to themselves, USACE. And it was really driven by an emergent situation with very unique requirements around the COVID-19 response. The customer had stood up a real-time information website in response to the pandemic, and the size and scale and dynamics of the effort were pretty intimidating. In addition to the technical solution, this required a big logistical and fulfillment focus and lift. Information that was flowing from USACE was excellent. They were forecasting over 600 field hospital site assessments. Those were anything from hotels, football stadiums, arenas, convention centers, dormitories that they were going to convert into field hospitals, and requirements to accommodate over 15,000 patients. That number actually continues to fluctuate. It's a very fluid situation. In order to meet the requirements for remote patient monitoring, our team needed to come up with the design to apply audio and video in non-conventional, austere conditions. With the entire world literally experiencing a shortage in PPE, the possibility of private healthcare facilities being overrun in the midst of this global pandemic, USACE deployed a field hospital concept not typically seen inside US borders. Many of us who have served overseas are familiar with the concept. But this is pretty new for our industry and really for the US. The sites specifically needed eyes and ears and a bidirectional speech and audio capability. Very non-standard in terms of the conventional safety and security requirements we typically see in the government and public sector. Our team was able to provide 3 separate designs, all COTS or commercial off-the-shelf solutions with very concise installation instructions, because the delivery channel for the operation was quite non-standard. We actually were able to eliminate some of the old analog technologies and expensive technology that was required around nurse call, and exceeded what USACE was looking for in terms of their requirements. Our design specifically included camera technologies and audio intercoms using IP audio and SIP technology with speakers and mics. Interestingly, what we found is that the solution ended up increasing the level of patient care and reduced the overhead for healthcare providers. So as many of you are aware, this is still an ongoing contingency effort, and USACE, the Corps of Engineers, is still fielding and standing up hospitals at this time. Over to you, Bob.
Wow, that's really cool. It's interesting to hear how military applications transfer over to civilian applications during a crisis. I did a little research about our first pandemic, well, the last pandemic 100 years ago. Ambulances and blood transfusions came out of that. So interesting to hear how the world is pivoting. Speaking of pivoting, Rick, with the customers you work with in retail and banking in Canada, what have you seen for them in working toward this new normal? Because going to retail today is not the same as it was 4 months ago.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. You know, Bob, retail and businesses face many challenges during this time. You just need to think about it. When's the last time that everybody had to close down their businesses within 24 hours in some cases? It's absolutely incredible. And they had no plan for this. There was no pandemic in the world planning that could lead to this. You know, the requirements to check businesses regularly, to comply with insurance policies, never before thought of. All of a sudden, you've got all these people who say, wow, can I reach out and my remote view all my video systems? Oh, wait, I have 35 different systems, which one's which? And all of a sudden, they saw some problems. But essential businesses had to continue to operate, and they had to modify the way they did business. Essential businesses continued to look at safeguards. They had to audit staff. They had to audit people coming into their businesses, dealing with partial staffing. So now you're not at a full-time staff, you're at half staff. How do you deal with all of these complexities? And compounded by civil unrest. So now you not only have closed stores, but you have stores that are susceptible to damage, fire, theft, looting. I mean, it was just a crazy scenario. And then on top of all that, we've got these people bombarding everyone with webinars and emails and meetings and communications and risk assessments and safety assessments, all these things coming at you. And not only that, those who were open had to deal with the increase in organized crime in retail, because now we took their environment from thousands upon thousands of stores and condensed it into hundreds. In comes technology. And so when we started to look early on, when we started to talk to our end customers, which is what we've done to engage the whole time, we heard things like remote viewing capability, it needs to get better. Bandwidth considerations, the consumption of bandwidth was not prepared for. All of a sudden, people went from an office that had a big pipe out to their normal homes, and in some cases, rural communities that had little to no connectivity. Trying to convert now what we call reactive platforms to proactive platforms. Long lines outside our stores, and how do we tell customers like that? How do we turn those live video feeds into our website to be able to say, hey, just click on our website, see if the line's long enough, because nobody wants to stand out in 100-degree weather waiting to get into a store. But on top of that, you've got governments, municipalities, regional governments all saying, hey, retailers, you're responsible for your compliance. Healthcare, you're responsible for compliance. So create the signage. And now all of a sudden you took this whole thing called online shopping and you said, let's turn up the heat. So now instead of 20% of the shoppers, we're turning it into 100%. All of a sudden, we have people pulling up to curbside pickups, and nobody knows what to do. Imagine if we had taken video, combined it to tag it with the vehicle approaching, and had an audio speaker that said, "Welcome, customer. Please remain in your vehicles. We'll be with you shortly." Wouldn't that have been a great customer experience? So now all of a sudden, we're looking at technology in a different way and putting in place today what we probably should have done yesterday. You know, when we look future into this component, you'll see a number of things that come to fruition. Scalability, sustainability, and return on investment. But now's the time because IT departments are so much relaxed. You can get a lot more things done. And how many people have heard the word cloud storage and putting analytics in the cloud so that we can deploy to thousands of systems tomorrow? That's my thoughts, Bob. Back to you.
Thank you. I imagine a world of curbside pickup. I like it. I think that will stick, but that's just a personal opinion. Hedgie, I don't know where the heck you are, but in the bigger US market where COVID has actually had the greatest worldwide impact of any country, can you give some perspective on your retail customers and what they're facing, how you've helped?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bob. Thanks for having me. I appreciate everybody being here. You know, it is a different world we're living in right now. Hopefully we will return to some semblance of the normal we once knew. I always remain eternally optimistic on these things. You know, first of all, I concur with a tremendous amount of what Rick has said. The Canadian retail market and the US retail market are very, very similar in many ways. And we've been faced with a lot of the exact same problems. You know, one of the things, though, that sort of compounds things in the US, you know, we, of course, have states' rights. And whenever government entities will try to make mandates across the entire US, it's not always as easy as one might think. And so you run into a lot of issues with guidelines and recommendations and mandates. And is it a mandate from the federal government? Is it a mandate from the state government? Or sometimes, in many cases, the city and local government. There are some areas where they said, I don't care what the governor said. In my city, we do it my way. And so imagine being a retailer that has, let's just say, 1,200 locations. What do you tell because in your mind, as that retailer, you are your own country, right? So you've got to communicate to all your stores the same message. You can't say to a store in Dallas, you're doing it one way, and a store in New York, you're doing it another way. I mean, you could, but is that really feasible? And so it's been an ongoing challenge for the retailers to establish what are my processes, what are my procedures? Most of them have said, we're just going to go with whatever jurisdiction has the most stringent requirements in the US. That is the one we will implement across the board for all our stores, which creates another problem. You are now relying on your employees who are trained retail folks. In some cases, very young, inexperienced people. You're relying on them after you train them on how to operate a cash register and how to maintain inventory and how to do, sales. Now they're having to be enforcers as well. And as a retailer, do you really want to be in a position of enforcing things? Some people still don't feel like they should wear masks, and they feel like it's an infringement on their freedoms. So do you want let's just say a mid-20-year-old employee to confront someone and say, hey, you can't come in without wearing a mask? The other side of that coin is, do you really want to deny a customer entrance into your stores when you've been shut down for 2.5 months? A lot of things to deal with, and that's one of the things about retail loss prevention. When you talk about the culture of security, retail loss prevention folks are actually very strategic in the approach to security, because they're literally inviting people into their stores, right? They don't have the luxury of saying, you're not an employee here, you can't come in. Or, you don't have an appointment, you can't come in, and things like that. They're inviting their people into their stores. And most people really feel like a retail store is a public space. In reality, it's not. It's obviously a private establishment. But there's that feeling of, I have the right to be here in the way I want to be here. Retail loss prevention has the mantra for the past several years has been, the LP person has been told, you have to do more with less. Times are tight. We're needing to increase our profitability. Your budget is being cut, but you still have to keep shrink at a all-time low. Well, here we are today, and these retail loss prevention folks that have been, they at their core are problem solvers, and that's how they've been able to do more with less. And so now they find themselves in a position where, okay, I was focused on shrink for the majority of my career, but now I'm also responsible for health and safety. I'm also responsible for risk. I'm also responsible, for all these other aspects of the business, and how I'm actually being tasked with how to protect our inventory from a COVID standpoint. What do we do about returns? What do we do about dressing rooms? And the way that my retailers have been approaching it, first of all, whenever they look at anything, they don't think, what kind of budget do I need to address this problem? They think, how can I address this problem through my people, my processes, and my procedures? Then what kind of technologies are available for me to augment that and for me to help my people do more with less? And then they then look at their existing technologies and their existing deployments and say, well, okay, how can I utilize this? What can I do maybe differently with my cameras or my EAS or my alarms or what have you? And if you think about it, in retail, no one owns more devices in a store than the retail loss prevention folks. They own cameras, they own alarm contacts and panels, they are involved at the point of sale, they have EAS, electronic article surveillance, they have many other different technologies, and so they are in a very advantageous position to bring these technologies together and say, okay, well, what happens if I can combine my camera with maybe a dwell analytic and a notification and an alert if somebody is in an area they're not supposed to be, or we've had X amount of people go in and out of the dressing room or the bathroom, to be able to, okay, we've had 5 people go in and out, it's time to clean it again, and things like that. So my retailers have really, even though this has been a very, very tough time for retail from a business standpoint, the comment and the sentiment that I've been hearing from my retailers in many cases is, this has actually been good because it's given us a pause. Revenue could be better, but it's given us an opportunity to say, okay, what do we need to do it better? We've got the time, we're sitting here in these video calls that we're all doing back to back all day long, to sit down and evaluate our situation and evaluate our technologies to do more with less.
That makes a lot of sense, Hedgie. I mean, retail definitely is at the forefront. They're dealing with the public, so they're dealing with the issues that the public's dealing with and the uncertainty, and they're very strategic. Taking advantage of this pause is hugely strategic, and it reminds me of a quote from Winston Churchill, which is to never let a crisis go to waste. So it sounds like they're doing that. For our listeners who are doing commercial work or end users of commercial, not retail, do you have anything that from a retail standpoint you think would be also useful for them, just generally from a commercial standpoint?
I think so. I think a lot of the technologies, especially the integrated systems that are being developed, would have application in the commercial space. Things like the whole counting people in and out of a location, specifically maybe a restroom or an area that's frequented, so that you can get an alert and have an event to action to clean that area, whether it's a restroom or any other area that's frequented, maybe a break room or what have you. Touchless door entry, utilizing your access control on your camera and maybe a Bluetooth sensor, so that when someone approaches and their phone is recognized in the system, it automatically opens the door. They don't even have to touch a doorknob or a keypad or anything like that. Or maybe just off of a facial recognition, when a face is within, and I don't mean recognition, I mean identification. So that when a face is within a certain range, the door is open for them automatically. Giving audio reminders, so that if maybe you have, based on your analytic, you've got 7 people in a certain area, you have an audio reminder that enunciates to say, remember to maintain a safe social distance of 6 feet or more, and the like. Of course, the big topic is mask detection. Being able to get an alert to notify, hey, And I'm not saying you don't allow someone in your facility because they're not wearing a mask, but now you have the opportunity to say, hey, welcome to ABC Company. We notice you don't have a mask. Here, we have a disposable one you're welcome to use while you're here. Wrong way detection. We're real big right now. If anybody's been to a grocery store or any other department store, there are one-way aisles and things like that. So being able to tell when somebody's maybe going the wrong way, and again, not confront them and say you're doing it wrong, but say, hey, if you don't mind, could you come around this way? It's an opportunity to provide some sort of service to the people that are in your facility. Curbside delivery. Now that is, obviously we all are aware of it with the retail environment. A lot of your retailers are offering curbside pickup. But what about if you have just FedEx coming to your office or location, or UPS, or anyone there to meet or greet with someone, to be able to have that technology that notifies you that someone is there, they need assistance, even maybe implementing license plate recognition of that. So not only do you know someone is there, but you know who is there and what your response needs to be at that time. So I think a lot of those technologies, a lot of those solutions, and quite honestly, I hate using the word solutions because being overused, and solution is basically an answer to a problem. So a lot of those answers can be utilized to address whatever other problem your general commercial business might have.
Cool. Thank you. I mean, yeah, it sounds like a lot of the industries can learn from each other. John, I think one of the exciting things about what you found with USAZY is the fact that people didn't have to, as they went from patient to patient, PPE or whatever the term might be, and contactless door and use of other technologies. Do you have any examples how this type of technology can also be deployed beyond what you guys did with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers?
Yeah, Bob, sure. That's an interesting comment and question. Really, what's been interesting is that the model which was designed for USACE has become a bit of a standard in the private healthcare sector, and also we're seeing it in VA facilities. The terms remote patient monitoring, with bidirectional audio, or the capability, it's been in use in healthcare, and from an analog perspective, using nurse call for years, but it was limited really compared to what we came up with by necessity. Nurses, healthcare personnel can now manage a larger patient population, providing better care and really delivering less stress on the provider. So telemed is one of the other terms that's being used. Telesitting has become a standard that we're seeing now in many hospitals. The other lessons learned were that dynamic real-world operations often have a byproduct that would take much longer to adopt. But things are so expedient, people are much more open to being creative. The healthcare field has actually benefited in similar ways in the U.S. and elsewhere through other battlefield medicine or medical practices, doctrine, and techniques, which have now been applied to the private healthcare space. You may have noticed I'm wearing a sling. I had my shoulder replaced a little over a week ago and was out of the hospital in about 8 hours. That procedure 5 years ago may have required, a 2 to 5 day stay. So seeing this kind of solution derived from the physical security space, operationalizing video and audio is really just a natural extension of that kind of mindset. We're starting to see this across many verticals today, and it's really the foundation or the crux of what my colleagues and I are speaking about in the webinar.
It's crazy how things changed quickly. My wife got a bad case of poison ivy, a reaction to it, so she drove to Emerge Care, and they said they won't see her, so to call the telehealth. So she called in the parking lot to a person who was in the building, and she got her thing fixed. So that definitely is a great point. Rick, occupancy kind of came up earlier, but recently I was outside a Home Depot, or we'll just call it a regular hardware store. I won't name names, although I just did, and it was pretty hot. And I waited a while. Are there technologies that can help companies, manage their occupancy?
Yeah, Bob, it's a great question, and probably the biggest question I've been faced with over the last 2.5 months. You know, occupancy has been around for a long, long time, and trying to convince businesses up until now that it is a useful tool for them really has been difficult. So when you utilize the technology, it was more than just that. It was looking at all the angles. How are you going to deal with compliance? And as Hedgie said earlier, people, policies and procedures are very, very important when it comes to this. And so, you know, the technology exists, but here's the thing. We needed to not only count people, we also had to figure out how we were going to make them aware. You know, when you were standing at that hardware store, there was somebody who had a physical count, and they would look at you and say, next, please. And when we looked at that, we said, well, okay, how are we going to do that? Well, we could count the people. We knew that we had space in the store. So let's tie it to another analytic, and let's put an IP speaker in there, and let's say next person enter, and then wait for them to pass. This requires a lot of integration steps, but it was beyond that. And then it was digital signage, and signage that was clear. So it's okay, you know, if you're in Southern California and you want to put a monitor outside and it's not raining, it's a beautiful environment, but you know, when you take this technology and you apply that to the Northeast come November, it's going to be pretty darn cold, and it's not going to work very well. So trying to find signage solutions that would be acceptable. Then the next thing is that looking at the accuracy. Now, these technologies have been tried and tested. We've been deploying them for years. And so we knew the accuracy rate was going to be 97%. But what happens when you have a 3% error rate and you have a foot traffic of 1,200 individuals a day? Now, all of a sudden, by 4 o'clock, you're over capacity. We just had to find a way to deal with it, and we had to work with our customers to come around it. So wait times, Danner, also came in. And then the next thing was the big one, scalability. Rick, great solution. Need to put it in 10,000 systems tomorrow. How do we do that? So making sure that the quick infrastructure, and we showed them, you know, that you need to be able to stand up the system, make it local the same way you did with the acrylic partitions between you and the cashier to protect you. You are amazed at how quickly all of the retailers stood up this architecture within their domains very, very quickly. But making sure that they had a plan, Bob, and occupancy. And now we've seen that stretch. Who hasn't heard about all of the technology companies who have decided they're getting equal use? So not everybody needs to return to an office. So it's hoteling the next space. And so as Hedgie alluded to, imagine now taking 3 floors, turning it into 2 floors and saying, hey, occupancy on the 10th floor is at 80%, but occupancy on the 11th floor is 10%. In order to get a desk, you're going to go to the 11th floor. So it's a signal indicator. So by tying that with audio, by tying that with digital media, by tying that with camera, by having confirmation by video, we can show an ROI, but more importantly, in future, we can find an application that continues to use it beyond just a pandemic, and it doesn't become something you throw on the shelf and say, okay, we'll wait for the next one to come and deploy it again.
It's crazy, the expediency and the urgency that things happen. Everything's happening so fast. I know I've heard of people getting requests for 10 to 20 to 30 times the normal demand to have it finished and installed within a 3-week period. It's crazy. So we've talked a lot about technology. As thought leaders, I imagine you guys were also faced with looking beyond technology, or might have some help for our listeners today on a holistic basis. So Hedgie, just kind of thinking beyond technology, are there other considerations that you would suggest for integrators and customers on the line today?
Absolutely, and I sort of referenced it earlier, but the reality is technology is not enough, right? You know, you need to work with your people. That's your number one asset. It's the number one, really revenue producer in your organization. So you need to work with them on implementing these technologies and how to respond, how to react, how to handle a situation if somebody might get irritated. and talk to them about de-escalation tactics and techniques, because we don't want things to get out of hand, and there's no reason for them to. You have to have these policies and how they should be responding when consumers are not in compliance. And some of our retailers have implemented these technologies for social distancing. I prefer physical distancing, so we're being pretty social right now, as well as mask detection and things like that. Only to find out that they didn't need to have their employees confronting folks. They didn't need to have their employees behaving as enforcers. Again, they're not trained for that. De-escalation and things like that take quite a while to really hone your skills. So they realized that it was, they could essentially rely on the public to self-enforce. If they have the technology in place and they have a sign or a notification or markings on the floor, they're wearing masks themselves, they can rely on the consumer, our society, to self-enforce. And at the very least, they can then say, well, we did what we could to be in compliance with the guidelines, mandates, laws, whatever the case may be. And that is the other issue, is the perception of doing something. There's a quick serve restaurant that I was listening to a presentation yesterday, and they talked about that they had implemented gloves, utilizing gloves in their locations. So the reality is utilizing gloves doesn't really solve the problem, right? Because unless you change your gloves after every little thing that you do, just because you're wearing gloves isn't helping. However, the consumer perception was, I want you wearing gloves. I want you showing me you're doing something to protect me. And so it's not necessarily just about only doing that which is proven effective, but doing that which serves your customer, which makes your customer feel comfortable, as well as doing those things that is effective: frequent cleanings, hand washing, masks and plexiglass guards and so forth. But again, talk to your staff on how they need to handle these situations. Tell them what your expectations are. Tell them what you feel society's expectations are. We hold a weekly call with retailers from all over Canada and US, where we talk about best practices and how to what they're doing, what they're seeing in various jurisdictions, various markets. And the one thing they said that, and I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone, the one thing they said that is still lacking, but they're working on improving, is the communication to all their folks, all their employees and associates. Because as Rick said, if you've got several thousand locations, think about how many employees you have in those locations and how you have to communicate to them what is expected, what your policies are, how they need to be responding and behaving. And I think all of us would say that if we had any company out there, the number one issue would probably be internal communication, right? We all need to communicate more and more effectively.
It's tough. I mean, the US is 50 different states, as you brought up earlier, and different states' rights, and Canada's definitely different than the United States, having lived there for 15 years. I live on a border of a state that its motto is live free or die, and I can tell you that nobody wears masks there. And in the state that I actually live in, everyone wears masks. So just a 5-mile difference is a huge change in perspective. And I can't imagine companies creating policies. Oh, it is tough. And you read about some of the conflicts. So that's really
Absolutely.
good. Really,
absolutely. And bordering states can be a challenge, because people can say, well, I was just in your store. Well, the laws or the mandates might be different across that state border. And then it goes back to communication as well. I actually found out yesterday that North Carolina, where I am, as of Friday, they are requiring masks in any retail public space area, and you can be fined as a misdemeanor if you are not in compliance. Quite honestly, if I hadn't run into somebody who mentioned that, I wouldn't have known. Fortunately, I didn't actually physically run into him, and I was wearing a mask, but I was glad to be educated so that I don't go out Friday and get a ticket.
Oh, well, Hedgie, you're lucky. Everyone's social distance from you anyway, so that's okay.
This is true.
On a more serious note, John or Rick, do you have any other comments on a holistic approach?
Yeah, Rick, I'll probably jump in here real quick and just say that, through challenges and crisis situations like, COVID-19, the civil unrest that we're seeing, people and teams really often get very creative and collaborative. That's what we saw within the Access community, I think, and a lot of our end users and integrators. From stressful environments, many positive outcomes and solutions are a common byproduct. I think you can expect to see a lot more non-conventional uses of technology in our society moving forward. But I'd say, as an integrator, keep working closely and collaboratively with your vendors and suppliers, and for end users, continue to be open-minded about maybe deploying some things that you may have shelved in the past, or were a little bit less you know um, open-minded about because it was just kind of an emerging tech. I don't know, Rick, what your comments might be.
Yeah, John, I totally agree. And just to expand on that a little bit, we have seen an uprising of development, new developments, new developers of analytics and AI approaches to the industry. And, the industry for years, and I was an integrator for 32 years. I've been an end customer. Now I'm on the manufacturer side. One of the things we always look at is something gets tagged as being not good, but technical advancements and technical changes and applications change with it. There's a few points I'd like to emphasize. Number one size doesn't fit all. Just because you find an application that works somewhere, it's not going to work everywhere. But similarly, the approach that John and his team took with the intercoms, we took over to retail. When restaurants had to close and all of a sudden DoorDash and Uber Eats and all of those people needed to interact, the simplest way was deploy an intercom at the door with video, show your ID, ring the bell, show your ID, somebody brings you out the package for the delivery, and everything's done and there's no interaction, and you can have that safe social distancing. But making sure that you're managing expectations of the customer, and this is the thing that we all at times forget. We need to manage with the customers what the outcome is going to be. And you know what? It's not going to be a plug and play solution if it is a new solution. And when it comes to integration, there are a million ways to integrate. And so we want to make sure that it's going to work right. And nothing's 100% certain. So make sure that you have the plan in place. The last thing I want to touch on and emphasize is what Hedgie said, and that is listen to your customers. So my holistic approach to this is really in a 5-piece segment. And the first piece is identifying the problem with the customer. What's needed in order to solve the problem at hand. And once you've identified that, the second thing is meaningful output. And I had one of my end users who still every day, it's one of the discussions we have, it's called meaningful output. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Imagine for yourself that you've gone into a drugstore and they decided to deploy face mask, right? Face mask technology. And if you're not wearing a face mask, listen, majority of the people that go into pharmacies are generally sick anyway. They need medication. That's why they're there.
True.
But now all of a sudden they're forced to wear a mask. And let's say it pops up and says no mask worn. Who do you want to respond to that? Do you want the cashier to respond to it? Do you want the stock boy to respond to it? Or do you want the pharmacy to come out and do it? Now you're asking somebody to be a compliance officer. So if that leader in that situation says, listen, I don't have a means to do this, is there really a purpose to it? And what is the positive outcome? So meaningful output is equally important to solving the problem. And then once you're done that, then find the technology, find the product that works, and figure out the integration. Because as you're figuring out that integration, you need to ask yourself as an integrator, do I have the skill sets needed to do this? How am I going to deploy it? Yeah, I have cablers. Yeah, I have people that can mount devices. Do I have enough programmers? Do I have enough people to get this in place? And am I going to jeopardize future business with that customer by going something beyond what I'm capable of doing. So maybe I need some outside help and look for that. Because in times of crisis is where we find times of delivery. And so what Hedgie and I have learned from this is, we may live in two different countries, but what we've realized is bringing the community of retailers together globally, not just from Canada, not just from US, but also from Latin America and Mexico, we've realized the same common things exist. And in order to solve problems, it is not just a silo. It's a group of people that you need to bring together and think through the process. And that's extremely important. So, working beyond technology is all about, making sure that end to end, you're comfortable in solving the problem and making it deliverable. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. Meaningful output. I imagine all of you have great credentials in the security industry. I really doubt any of them went through the scenario of mask or not to mask and how to approach them. So unprecedented times. So the last thing here, and we will open this up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, put it in the chat. There's already a question or two in there, but if there's a question you'd like us to answer, please do that. The last thing we'll conclude with is, a lot of things we're doing today is reaction for today, but I think we've already alluded that during this crisis that a lot of things that we can do today will actually stick for tomorrow. Just a final question to the panel. Anybody can answer, what have you seen people willing to risk that they wouldn't have risked in normal times that they found out it actually works?
So, one thing that I'm seeing is that, a lot of these technologies that we're talking about for things like occupancy and social distancing and things like that, they're essentially leveraging and capitalizing on some of the technologies that have been there for a while, people counting, dwell time, heat mapping, line queuing and things like that. But the approach had always been, we're looking at these analytics from a business intelligence standpoint, right? What we can gain from them down the road. And the traction has been, so-so. But now this is, kind of accelerated a lot of that. And people are saying, okay, now we're implementing these things to do a particular function, right? To give us an actionable response. Well, as this hopefully goes away and you're no longer, knock on wood, no longer needing the occupancy or social distancing type things, you can still leverage and benefit from the business intelligence. You've deployed it for one purpose, and now it has another purpose going forward. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind as you're looking at any solution is how can I use this to benefit my business long term, not just to address today's problem right now. Which is, obviously your ROI becomes much more palatable.
Indeed, and that is important. And we are, running businesses, long term. Rick or John, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick, and I think it's kind of what I've been alluding to, throughout the webinar is the operational use of video and analytics, specifically the trend towards AI-based analytics in our space. A couple of examples that we've seen, in the government or public segment that are fairly prevalent, facial recognition, license plate recognition, and now even weapons detection capabilities, heat mapping, and voice aggression using sound actually that can be deployed at the edge to determine, if crowds are aggregating and there's a situation that might turn into civil unrest. And we're also seeing the rapid fielding of, AI-based search tools, which allow for forensic search of multiple sources of video. It's being used quite prevalently for evidence gathering, and you're starting to see, as a result of some of this social unrest that turned violent, they're using it to actually, in an evidentiary kind of way. A lot of our customers are showing more of a willingness to explore these types of solutions and seeing the merits of deploying these kinds of tools, which prior to COVID-19 and other events would more likely, as I said earlier, would have been a wait and see kind of approach.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what John says, and one of the things that I would add as well, Bob, is it's a very interesting time. What I've learned from this is a couple of things. I've learned that more about marketing around retail environments. I've learned about health and safety, making people feel comfortable. So it's all about the experience, whether it's our staff, whether it's our customers, whether it's our visitors, and being able to utilize things like automated ways of doing things, checklists, sending people QR codes, putting, touchless entry in. All of these things are feel good, right? They make us feel safe, right? And so as we do this, we need to learn how to take those technologies one step further. The age of audio is here, where we can make functionality happen and make good customer experience from audio. And not a lot of people have applied this technology. It's there for the use, and that's what we're starting to adapt. But the biggest thing, that I've learned is evaluating and going through the whole period and saying, okay, it's here today. What are we going to do with it tomorrow? And making sure that nothing just gets thrown on a shelf and destroyed. Because right now, as you started the whole discussion with today, Bob, these are stressful economic times. A lot of businesses have been forced to shut down, and every penny counts. And at the same token, I heard one very large retailer say they have themselves a panelist of 1,000 customers, and how they make decisions for their business is based on those 1,000 customers and how they feel. And amazingly enough, as I watched through this whole crisis, they were the one group, and I won't mention any names, but they were the one group whose basically e-commerce platform crashed the very first week, okay? But they have the biggest sales return of any organization because they listened to their customers and they made all the approaches necessary to make them feel comfortable. So whether it was technology or whether it was a system or whether it was a policy, whatever it was, they just started listening. And that's the thing that we as an industry really need to do, is listen carefully and apply carefully. And sometimes it's better to wait 24 hours and make the right decision than to push just a new technology forward that you have no clue whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Of course. Thank you, guys. We actually have a few questions from the audience, so let's head on to that. The first question is have any of you noticed a shift in funding priorities, with most companies benefiting from telework and abandoning the commercial space?
I'll chime in on that. What I've noticed is there's a lot of consideration to that. I think we're still, all things considered, when you look at the length of lease terms for the many years that leases are frequently written for. So we're still kind of early in that decision. I would personally wager that you're going to see a lot more flexibility in the telework type environment, more and more companies allowing that. And I think it will impact the commercial real estate space. To what degree? I don't know. I'm a retail guy, not a commercial real estate guy. But from a retail standpoint, brick and mortar is not going away. It continues to change. And so from the retail commercial space, there will still be occupancy.
And speaking from the banking space and not the retail space, because that is my other vertical, a very interesting thing has come out of this. More and more people have been forced to use technology, and everybody's asking the question, what does that mean? Does that mean I need a branch on every corner? And there was this whole frightening element of, does cash go away? And I know, particularly in Canada, there was a request for retailers and others to take cash because there was this pot of cash that wasn't moving. Everybody had concerns. Hopefully we've kind of answered those. But I think as things go on, things will shift. And, when we look at it today, Bob, we're speaking from all over the United States and Canada, and we're able to do it digitally. How does technology apply there, and how do we make things very change? But the one common element that I think all people still have unrest with, no matter what happens, is, and that's a topic we haven't talked about, is cybersecurity. And cybersecurity needs to be top of mind as people work from home, technology, and no matter where you're applying it, right? So if I'm reaching out from here to my local office and I'm looking at remote video, or I'm using the audio component, or I'm using access control unlocks, what's the cybersecurity between those 2 points? And a lot of people have forgotten about that. And when we all return to the office and we all plug into that network, how many viruses are going to be on the network at that point? So, not to bring it in, but part of that whole technology solution that we haven't talked about is, as we look at these things, we need to look more and more onto cybersecurity, and that's going to become a big component of what we do in IP technology as a whole.
It makes a lot of sense, Rick. Of course, our company has VPNs, other things, and I'm working from home. Who knows what the risks are here now? There's an interesting question here there's a term here that I haven't heard before, and the question is, I have many customers who are looking for proof of concept, which I have heard. Proof of validation, maybe they're the same thing. Do you have any input on the best approach?
I'll let John take that one, because John understands the two differences.
Oh, because he works with government and all the acronyms?
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, proof of concept, POCs, have been around for a while. Proof of value is a term that I heard from one of our partners. And it actually ties into what I was talking about, where a lot of customers have been in a wait and see approach. Hey, that looks interesting, but I'm not really sure, and so instead of saying a proof of concept, our partner has termed it a proof of value or valuation. And we see that can be an interesting way to position it, because with that, you can put some metrics around it that a lot of times, people forget to do. They deploy the technology, and then, so what do we have at the end? Well, what is the sausage that comes out of this whole evolution? So a proof of valuation, where we come in, we have a professional services group, and we've actually done this successfully with a couple government customers, where we've had emerging technologies and some hesitancy for adoption. And I think you have to have a combination of things that make that a success. First of all, you have to have a very compliant, forward-leaning customer. In other words, they're willing to take a risk and a look at new technologies. You have to have a very savvy technical integrator that can tie a lot of these things together. And then without any of that, I mean, you got to have good products and good products that can be, tied together to come to, a solution for whatever that whatever you're trying to accomplish there. So, I mean, those are the two differences in the nuances of the terms. But again, I think you're going to see where we saw proof of concept requests or proof of valuation requests in the past. I think you're going to see more, and I'm seeing it already, aggressive, like, hey, let's deploy it and see what happens. Let's put some good metrics around it and determine whether this thing has some legs. So that's my perspective on it, at least.
Yeah, and the long-term validation, just for the proof of validation, and a technology that's been there for a long time just needs to be validated by the user, which comes at a little different skin in the game, if you will. And everybody needs to participate in that. But as John said, clearly there's got to be an outcome. If we meet X, Y, and Z, are you going to deploy this technology? Because a lot of time and money goes into this, investment from the manufacturer, investment from the integrator, really to deliver a technology. So, proof of concept would be something that we've come up with as a solution. Proof of value just shows that it's going to have an ROI. Proof of validation just simply means, hey, we know the product did everything we told you it would do. We met these requirements. Where are we going to the next level? And just kind of ease some of the burden, because with all the things going on, the last thing we need is trying to implement solutions that people don't ever have the intention of buying.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I think you guys touched on this as well to a certain degree. The metrics for success are very important. A proof of concept or proof of validation is I think critical in determining whether it's going to have value moving forward. But you need to have the metrics set forth. What is going to determine whether this was a success or not? And especially in my space of retail, you need to be sure that there is someone involved with the project that is accountable for it, that is going to take ownership, that is, and I mean somebody from the customer's standpoint, that is willing to really be committed to whether or not this is going to work and giving you the input and the feedback so that you know that you're either on track or not on track. You know that they're engaged or not. Because I did a proof of concept with a retailer a while back that it started out where they were very excited and could not wait to get it going, and no one from the operational side, because this was not security related, no one from the operational side took any sort of accountability. And 6 months later, everyone was looking at each other going, hey, is this working? I don't know. What's happening? Does anybody know what's going on with this? So make sure you have that champion on the other end that's going to be a part of the whole project.
Cool. Okay, last question. And then for your answers, if you guys could just keep it really succinct. It's a hot topic. It's one of the most popular questions me and my PR team gets, and that is on thermal. What is Axis doing in the space, and thoughts from you guys in regards to being a reactive purchase, or do we see a longer term ROI for end users to justify thermal investments? All of a sudden, there are numerous products out there bombarding the industry. Curious on your thoughts. So yes or no? Okay.
Nobody wants to answer.
Well, if you guys don't answer, you're gonna leave it up to me.
I'll throw something out. I mean, I'll keep it brief. I mean, our position really, Bob, as you know, is that, we don't want to necessarily recommend if we're talking about thermographic technologies to check, people's temperatures. There's a lot of new entrants to the space. We have complementary solutions, with our visible spectrum cameras and our thermal cameras. We're out there kind of exploring what's out there. I just talked to a customer that's been in business for 18 years. They're Australian, very interesting solution. And it's not, they're not even trying to get any kind of an FDA approval because they're not looking for it to be a medical device. It's really more of a preemptive kind of solution that and they can do, they purport that they can do up to 30 people in a scene. So for casinos, for public events, areas where they need huge throughput, employees returning to government facilities, if you can see 30 people in a field and flag somebody that's out of range and just pull them aside for further investigation by a medical team, that's probably something that might fly. But it's an emerging space. Again, we have complementary technologies there. We're trying to be consultative in our approach. At least I am. I don't know about Rick or Hedgie, how you guys are approaching it.
You're not consultative ever, so you're the only one.
Yeah, and the last approach that I have to this is, know your risk, know what you're getting into. But I'm really saying to people, look for all the other things, because in retail you're going to have lineups and people in 100-degree weather. I suffer from Lyme disease. I got Lyme disease a year ago, and running a fever from time to time is normal for me. So, and then for other areas, what happens if somebody's just not feeling well that day, or they just generally run hot. So, look for the approvals, look for the steps, but know what you're buying and how you're buying it. So that's kind of my stance on it.
Yeah, from an Axis standpoint, since it was asked, I mean, we don't recommend our thermals to be used in that capacity. We're not FDA approved. I mean, whether you use it long term, I mean, that's going to be, how you want to run your business. So I think it's really case by case, and there are companies that are FDA approved. And I would look for that in terms of getting through all the, I hate to say it, all the marketing about solutions here that probably aren't the right solutions. Italy warned the US about the pandemic, and they said along with the pandemic would be an infodemic. So there's buyer beware on that. I appreciate everybody attending the webinar panel. You guys were amazing. Thank you. I wish I could see you in person. And for the audience, these three are amazing virtually. They're even better in person. Take my word for it. And I'm going to send it back over to Joan. And remember, we are all in it together. So reach out, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thanks to you all, and thanks, Bob, for moderating today. A reminder to viewers that you can also watch the webinar on demand at iscnews.com going forward and share it with others from the site. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.